Have you ever wondered why your money is just a piece of paper and not a shiny gold coin? This question opens up a fascinating conversation about two distinct monetary systems, the gold standard and fiat money. The gold standard, as the name suggests, is a system where a country's currency derives its value from a specified amount of gold. Picture this. In a gold standard era, your banknotes were essentially IOUs for gold. You could march into a bank, hand over your paper money, and get a corresponding amount of gold in exchange. On the other hand, we have fiat money. It's the paper or digital money we use today, issued by the government. Unlike the gold standard, fiat money isn't backed by a physical commodity like gold. Instead, its value is based on the trust and confidence we place in the economy. So why did we move from gold to paper? To truly understand the gold standard, we have to travel back in time. Picture this. The 19th century, a time when the world was beginning to industrialize and nations were seeking a stable economic system. This was the era when the gold standard came into existence. But why gold? Well, gold was universally accepted, scarce, and indestructible, making it a perfect standard for money. The gold standard essentially meant that a country's currency was directly linked to gold. For example, if a country had 1,000 gold bars in its bank, it could only print 1,000 units of currency. Was an exception to this during the Great Depression, however, when the Federal Reserve was permitted to print money up to 200% of the gold reserve to stimulate the economy. However, they didn't do it. This system aimed to keep inflation in check and ensure economic stability. As time passed, the gold standard saw widespread adoption. The United Kingdom was the first to implement it in 1821, followed by the United States in 1879, and other major economies soon followed suit. One of the key historical events during this period was the Bretton Woods Agreement in 1944. This agreement, attended by 44 countries, established fixed exchange rates between countries, with the US dollar pegged to gold and other currencies pegged to the dollar. However, the Bretton Woods system started showing cracks by the late 1960s, and in 1971, the United States suspended the convertibility of the dollar into gold, effectively ending the gold standard. This suspension was not without reason. The United States, embroiled in the Vietnam War and grappling with domestic economic issues, found difficult to maintain the gold standard. The system, which was once seen as a pillar of stability, was now viewed as a constraint on economic growth. But let's not jump ahead. To appreciate the complexity of the gold standard, it's essential to understand its benefits and why it was so widely adopted in the first place. What made the gold standard so appealing? This is a question that has intrigued many minds over the years. The gold standard in its prime came with a trove of benefits that made it a gem in the world of economics. One of the primary perks was its potential to limit inflation. With the value of money directly linked to gold, the supply of money was inherently restrained, preventing governments from printing money recklessly and causing inflation. Another glittering benefit was long-term price stability. Over centuries, the value of gold has remained relatively consistent, providing a stable benchmark for prices and economic planning. Lastly, the gold standard instilled a sense of confidence in the economy. Knowing that their money was backed by something tangible and valuable, people felt secure and were more likely to invest and spend, driving economic growth. Sounds like a golden deal, right? But it wasn't all glitter and gold. Every coin has two sides, and the gold standard was no exception. As much as the gold standard had its merits, it was not without its drawbacks. One of the major downsides was its inflexibility in responding to economic crises. Under the gold standard, the amount of money a country could issue was directly tied to its gold reserves. This meant that during economic downturns, when there was a need for more money in circulation to stimulate spending, a country couldn't simply print more money. It was held hostage by the amount of gold it had. Moreover, the gold standard put a cap on economic growth. The global gold supply is finite, and thus, so was the potential for economic expansion under the gold standard. This meant that as economies grew and as population increased, there would inevitably be less gold-backed money per person and per transaction. This could, in theory, lead to deflation and economic stagnation. Then, there were the speculative attacks. In a gold standard system, if investors believed that a country's gold reserves were insufficient to back its money supply, they could start exchanging their currency for gold en masse. This could deplete a country's gold reserves and destabilize its economy. It was these limitations, among others, that led many countries to transition from the gold standard to fiat money. money that has value simply because a government decrees that it does. Fiat money is not backed by a physical commodity like gold. Instead, its value comes from the trust and confidence people have in the government that issues it. Fiat money gives governments the flexibility to adjust their money supply as needed. They can print more money during economic downturns to stimulate spending, and reduce the money supply during booms to keep inflation in check. This brings us to the present day where most countries use fiat money. Why did we say goodbye to the gold standard? The reasons are numerous and layered. We've explored the pros and cons of the gold standard, its history, and how it compares to fiat money. We've seen that while the gold standard offered a certain level of security and stability, it also had its limitations. It couldn't respond quickly to economic changes, and it tied the hands of policymakers. In the throes of the Great Depression, some argue that the gold standard even exacerbated the crisis. Today we live in a world where fiat money rules. It's not backed by physical commodities like gold, but instead, it's based on the faith and credit of the economy. Whether it's a piece of gold or a piece of paper, the value of money ultimately comes down to our trust in it. Let's shift gears and venture into a world of imagination. Picture a parallel universe where the euro and dollar are still tethered to the gold standard. Makes you wonder, doesn't it? What would be the price of gold in such a scenario? In a gold standard system, the price of gold is determined by the amount of currency in circulation divided by the nation's gold reserves. So if we were to hypothetically calculate the price of gold for the euro and dollar, we'd need to know the total amount of these currencies in circulation and the gold reserves of the European Central Bank and the United States Federal Reserve. Let's crunch some numbers. If we take the total amount of euros in circulation, which is approximately 1.4 trillion, and divide it by the European Central Bank's gold reserves, which is roughly 10,800 tons, we'd get a hypothetical price of approximately €3,700 per ounce. Similarly, if we take the total amount of US dollars in circulation, which is about 2 trillion, and divide it by the US Federal Reserve's gold reserves, which is around 8,100 tons, we'd get a hypothetical price of gold in dollars of approximately $7,000 per ounce. But before we get carried away, let's anchor back to reality. This is a purely hypothetical exercise and not a forecast of future gold prices. It's a fascinating thought experiment that illustrates the intrinsic relationship between money and gold in a gold standard system. In our world of fiat money, the price of gold is influenced by a multitude of factors, including but not limited to supply and demand, inflation, and geopolitical events.